kind of a loss is this to the industry?
I don't know. I really don't know. Not yet, we don't know.
They were Hollywood's most mysterious duo, Frank Sinatra, the voice that ruled America, and Sammy Davis Jr., the fearless black performer who defied every boundary. Together, they shined brighter than anyone dared to imagine. But behind the curtain, whispers never stopped. Some called their bond revolutionary, others called it forbidden. Rumors of hidden motives, secret power, and unspoken love followed them everywhere. Yet Sinatra never said a word. He faced the world with silence until the end of his life, when he finally broke it with one single sentence that changed how everyone remembered Sammy Davis Jr. It was 1941, backstage at the Michigan Theater in Detroit. The air was thick with cigarette smoke, and the hum of swing music filled the halls. A young Frank Sinatra, just beginning to taste the sweetness of fame as the lead singer of the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra, walked into the break room for a quick bite. There, sitting quietly in the corner, was a skinny 16-year-old kid from the Will Maston Trio. His name was Sammy Davis Jr. Fate needed no introduction. Sinatra picked up a sandwich, noticed the hungry boy watching, and split it in half. "You hungry, and kid?" he asked with that smooth Jersey confidence. Sammy's eyes lit up. In that simple act of sharing a sandwich, a bond was born, one that would outlive fame, fortune, and the noise of the world. From that night on, Sammy was hooked. He collected every magazine clipping, every radio mention of Sinatra, storing them in a small notebook to show his grandmother. To him, Sinatra wasn't just a star. He was proof that respect could be earned, that a man's voice could cross barriers that skin color could not. In an America still drowning in segregation, it was rare for a white performer to even speak to a black artist backstage, let alone share a meal. But Sinatra didn't care about rules. He cared about people who had heart. That night in Detroit was not just the start of a friendship, it was the quiet beginning of something revolutionary. Two men defying an unspoken wall that divided their world. By 1944, the world was at war, and so was Sammy Davis Jr. Drafted into the U.S. Army at just 19, he traded the stage lights for the blinding cruelty of a segregated barracks. Inside those walls, hatred wore uniforms. White soldiers beat him and spat on him, and treated him like he did not belong to the same country he was fighting for. Every insult cut deeper than a wound. Yet, instead of breaking, Sammy turned pain into performance. He discovered that laughter could disarm hatred. He began entertaining troops, using jokes and dance to melt away hostility, even if only for a moment. The same soldiers who mocked him found themselves clapping to his rhythm. For Sammy, the stage became his shield, and music became his quiet form of resistance. One night, during his short leave, he watched a new film starring Frank Sinatra called The House I Live In. It was only 10 minutes long, but it changed his life forever. In it, Sinatra confronted a group of boys who mocked a Jewish child and delivered a powerful message about equality. "All men are created equal," Sinatra said, looking straight into the camera. For Sammy, it felt personal, as if Sinatra was speaking directly to him through the screen. That short film became more than art. It was a promise, a whisper that said change was possible. From that day, Davis carried Sinatra's words with him like a compass. Even in a world that refused to see his worth, he believed one truth: talent could silence prejudice, and courage could turn pain into purpose. In 1947, Frank Sinatra stood at the peak of his fame. Every theater wanted him, every crowd adored him. But when he was booked to perform at the Capitol Theater in New York, Sinatra made an unusual demand. He told the organizers, "I'll only perform if the Will Maston Trio opens the show." The managers hesitated. A black group opening for the biggest white star in America? It was unthinkable. Sinatra didn't argue. He simply added one more condition: the trio must be paid 5 times their usual fee. It was an offer no one could refuse. That night, Sammy Davis Jr. walked onto a stage filled with white faces and flashing lights. For the first time, the audience that had once ignored him now listened. Every move, every note, every smile broke another invisible barrier. When the curtain closed, the crowd cheered. Sammy had arrived, and the man who had opened the door for him watched from the wings, smiling proudly. But fate would soon test that bond. In 1954, tragedy struck. A car crash nearly killed Sammy and left him blind in one eye. The world that had just begun to embrace him suddenly turned dark. Hospital bills piled up, and despair crept in. Yet Sinatra never left his side. He paid the expenses, visited him in the hospital despite his fear of that sterile smell, and brought him to his home in Palm Springs to heal. When Sammy finally opened his good eye and saw Sinatra waiting by his bed, he said quietly, "When I lost my eye, I had nowhere else to go but Frank's house." It wasn't just gratitude. It was proof that real loyalty doesn't need headlines. It just shows up when the world disappears. By the early 1950s, Las Vegas had become the glittering heart of American entertainment. But behind its neon lights hid an ugly truth. Black performers could sing on the grandest stages, yet they weren't allowed to sleep in the same hotels where they performed. They were expected to dazzle the crowds and then vanish into the segregated neighborhoods outside the city. Sammy Davis Jr. knew that humiliation well. He could make the whole room laugh. But when the curtain fell, he had to walk through the back door. Then came Frank Sinatra. When the management of the Sands Hotel told him that Sammy could perform but not stay there, Sinatra didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "If Sammy doesn't stay, I don't sing." The room went silent. The Sands executives panicked. Canceling Sinatra meant losing the biggest headliner in America. Within hours, they changed the rule. Sammy Davis Jr. checked into the hotel that night as a guest, not as an exception, but as an equal. The one act of defiance rippled across Las Vegas. Other hotels followed, quietly rewriting their own policies. The city that once shut its doors began to open them, not out of kindness, but out of fear of losing the man who had the courage to say no. For Sammy, it was more than a victory. It was the moment the world began to see him as more than a performer. And for Sinatra, it wasn't a stunt or a speech. It was a choice. A simple, silent rebellion that said, friendship is not real if it bows to injustice. By the late 1950s, Frank Sinatra was not just a singer, he was the king of cool. And at his side stood the Rat Pack, a group that embodied swagger and charm like no other. Dean Martin, Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, and Sammy Davis Jr. Together, they ruled Las Vegas. Their shows were more than performances. They were wild under unpredictable parties where jokes, drinks, and songs flowed like electricity. To the audience, it was magic. To history, it was iconic. But behind the spotlight, the laughter carried an uncomfortable edge. Sammy Davis Jr., the only black man in the group, became the target of constant racial jokes. On stage, Sinatra or Martin would tease him about his skin, his voice, or his high on. Sammy would smile and laugh along. The crowd erupted, thinking it was all fun, yet every laugh left a bruise. Outside the stage, some in the black community began to turn on him. Activists called him Uncle Tom, accusing him of playing the clown to gain white approval. Newspapers questioned why a man as talented as Sammy would tolerate being the punchline of his own friends. But Davis never fought back publicly. He chose silence over confrontation, professionalism over pride, because he knew what was at stake. The Rat Pack wasn't just friendship. It was power, influence, and access to stages that no black performer had ever reached before. Night after night, Sammy smiled under the bright lights while a quiet storm raged inside him. To the world, he was part of the Rat Pack. But deep down, he was a man walking a tightrope between acceptance and identity, laughter and loneliness. By 1959, the Rat Pack had become America's royal court of entertainment. Crowds worshipped them, reporters followed them, and every casino wanted a piece of their magic. But behind the laughter, the cracks were widening, and one interview would turn those cracks into a fault line. During a live radio show in Chicago, Sammy Davis Jr. spoke about Sinatra. His words began with praise. He called Frank his mentor, the man who opened every door for him, but then perhaps too comfortably. He added that Sinatra could sometimes be impossible, stubborn, and cruel. The remark was small, almost playful, but when it reached Sinatra's ears, it felt like betrayal. Within days, Sinatra exploded. He called Sammy and unleashed a fury that few had ever seen. Insiders whispered that his words crossed every line of respect. Then came the punishment. Davis was cut from Sinatra's upcoming film, Never So Few. Every door Sinatra controlled slammed shut for months. Sammy was out-exiled from the circle that had built his fame. It took Dean Martin's charm and Peter Lawford's diplomacy to finally bring peace. Just before filming Ocean's 11, Sinatra relented and allowed Sammy back. But something essential had broken. The warmth that once filled their friendship now felt colder, more controlled. Years later, when asked about the incident, Davis gave a bittersweet answer. "I know who runs the show," he said quietly, "and I know where I stand." It was more than acceptance, it was surrender, a public confession that power, not love, decided who stayed in the spotlight and who waited in the shadows. The wounds between them never fully healed. But time has a way of testing what is real. In the early 1960s, America was burning with tension, and the civil rights movement was rewriting the country's conscience. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. could have gone their separate ways, but instead, they found themselves standing on the same side of history. Sinatra used his fame as a weapon against injustice. He organized a fundraising concert for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at Carnegie Hall, an event that drew Hollywood's elite and sent a message louder than any song he had ever sung. He didn't give speeches or wave banners, he acted. And when Vegas hotels refused to hire or serve black workers, Sinatra made his stance crystal clear. If discrimination happened, he would not perform. The casinos folded one by one, realizing that losing Sinatra meant losing the city's heartbeat. Sammy watched quietly, moved by his friend's defiance. He knew Frank's temper, his pride, and his ego. But this was something different. It wasn't about headlines, it was about loyalty and conviction. Then came 1961. John F. Kennedy's inauguration was the event of the decade, and Davis had been invited to perform. But when news broke that he had married Mae Britt, a white actress, the invitation was revoked to avoid upsetting Southern voters. Sammy was devastated. Sinatra, who had campaigned tirelessly for Kennedy, was enraged. Without a word, he cut all ties with the White House. It was a quiet act of rebellion, a friendship once scarred by pride, now bound by principle. In a world divided by color and politics, Sinatra and Davis stood together, proving that sometimes the loudest protest is simply refusing to stay silent. By 1987, time had stolen their youth, but not their bond. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. reunited one last time for a world tour with Liza Minnelli. Their steps were slower, their voices roughened by age, yet the chemistry between them still lit the stage. Every song felt like a memory of her, every laugh like a farewell. 3 years later, in 1990, Sammy lost his battle with cancer. The world mourned, but Sinatra mourned differently. He canceled all his show, flew to California, and quietly carried his friend's coffin with trembling hands. When asked to speak, he didn't deliver a grand speech. He simply said, "I wish the world could have known Sammy the way I did." That single line said everything. It wasn't guilt or confession, it was love, the kind that outlives fame, pride, and even death itself. Years after the spotlight faded, their story continued to echo. Tracy Davis, Sammy's daughter, revealed that her father had always been grateful to Sinatra, even during the years when the jokes cut deep and the pressure was unbearable. "He knew what Frank gave him," she said. "Opportunity, protection, and a place no one else would have offered." Their friendship was never perfect, but it was real. Two men standing together in a world divided by race, power, and pride. They fought, they forgave, and they left behind something greater than fame, proof that loyalty can exist even in the harshest light. When Sinatra passed away in 1998, newspapers called them the bond that defied color. Yet for those who truly knew, it was simpler than that. Their legacy could be captured in just 4 words: respect and true friendship. Celebrate a timeless friendship that broke barriers and defined loyalty. Like him, share and subscribe to keep these legendary stories alive forever.